All right, I'm at the Red House with my friend Roy Nydorf. Thank you for coming over.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
So, just to introduce you to
Yes.
people on the podcast, maybe you could just give me a bio of what you do in the arts that you're involved in.
Okay. I'm a lifelong artist, practicing artist. I am mostly carving wood these days, figurative art, and I work in Greensboro, out of Greensboro, North Carolina, or nearby. I've been living down here for about 45 years, migrating from points north, and yeah, it's the
Yeah.
beginning of it.
Yeah, that is how I met you. You were here collecting some wood for some carving.
Right.
And that is probably the aspect of your art that I'm most curious about, though I'm sure we'll talk about all sorts of shit. But
Okay.
yeah, like how did you end up with that skill set and in that craft?
Okay. That's a good question. I had my mother was a sculptor who worked in clay. My father was a painter, and they were both commercial artists as well and illustrators. So I grew up with art, since I was a child, and they collected objects from all over the world, and in particular, they had a collection of African masks and figures and masks from the South Seas, New Guinea, and some things from Mexico. So I really had this powerful, this images around me, as well as being steeped in classical art, Egyptian art and Greek art. My mother loved, and so I sort of adopted her love for that art because we lived in Long Island, New York, and I had access to museums. And so, yeah, and then along the way, I kind of stumbled into printmaking, and I was teaching a printmaking class at Guilford College and was sharpening my tools to show a woodcut demonstration. And all my tools were sharp, and I thought, oh, maybe I'll see how this works, in a three-dimensional way. And I started carving wood, and I had a student who is Cherokee, and he got interested, and we both started carving masks together, and that really just led to kind of throwing aside painting and drawing. Well, not so much drawing, but I see that wood carving is like drawing in 3 dimensions. So that's kind of how I got into it.
I've looked through the stuff that you have on Instagram and stuff, and it's pretty amazing and like impressive and a sight to behold. And I'm like, yeah, I don't. It made me really curious about the craft, I guess, just looking through it. Like, what? I don't know. Like, how ancient of a practice is this? Do you know much about the culture of this?
Yeah, I think that's what appeals to me. Is I like, I love history, and I love old things, and I love art from thousands of years ago. I just think it's really mysterious, and I love art that has power, not just decorative. And yeah, the Inca were carving wood. I mean, there's not a lot of things that have survived from pre-Columbian, Central America, but some things, and African sculptures that date back to, that they have dated back to 1400s and earlier, Middle Ages, and certainly in Europe as well. So, and stone carving, that's been around since the beginning, of humankind. Also, I will say that I love trees, and I really have a close affinity to trees, and I love to shape them and prune them and plant them. And also, I heated with wood for almost 20 years, so I learned a lot about wood, the properties of different kinds of wood. But the craft, I think drawing is the basis for everything. So the line that I use, and I think it just came out of thinking about form and studying a lot of art.
Mm.
You know.
Man, that's so cool. It's so interesting. It's such an interesting glimpse into, I guess, our like creative past as a species, to think about why these more ancient people all this time ago started crafting these materials into these shapes and these structures and stuff. It's obviously it's not that far off from the tradition of building houses or something, but it is different because it's aesthetic and it's maybe spiritual. Was there like
Absolutely.
a spiritual component to this
Very
stuff?
much so. Totally.
What is the spiritual component to like the masks in particular?
Well, first of all, the wood, the trees themselves are, organic. They're growing, they're twisting, they're suffering, they're showing all this life force, this energy. And the masks and the figures that I grew up with, some of them were, I think, secular, I guess you could say, but a lot of them, I know, were used in ceremonies and rituals that we could call religious, but communal. I also have to say that another powerful influence on me were the Northwest Coast totem cultures. Mm-hmm. And I've seen and studied a lot of those carvings, and they're just amazing, so powerful. And they were actually like crests. They weren't really religious per se. They were mounted in front of these villages facing the water and kind of giving a family identity. And I just love that about this kind of art. I also love the fact that it's kind of rare. There are not a lot of people carving these days as they used to. Everybody before television had to amuse themselves on their porches out in the country, wherever. And often, whittling or carving canes and things like that, I think was a lot more commonplace than it is now. Now you almost, carvers are kind of rare around here. They're not so rare in like some of the native communities. They're still doing it.
So I want to ask about what you just said, the totem thing.
Yeah.
So these totem poles that we've seen all our lives, kind of caricatured in media and stuff. So that was like a family symbol.
Pretty much.
That kind of told a story or gave an identity to the family.
Right.
That is really interesting.
Yeah.
I never knew that.
And they're status symbols as well. Importance, like an important family or a chief or.
So not every family necessarily would have one.
I don't think so. I don't think every family would have one.
Huh.
But
yeah, I've never learned a thing about them. Do you know what kind of wood they were
Cedar.
usually carved? Cedar?
Yeah. That was traditionally the wood because it's rot resistant. And the main thing is, and I have to say, I like the fact we were talking earlier about, recycling and reusing and repurposing. I think I've bought wood a couple of times. I find it, people give it to me, I look for it. I've got woods around me. A lot of the woods are local.
Yeah.
And that's just part of the thing. I think that's kind of cool, but cedar.
Yeah.
The rainforest, those things grow. They're hundreds of years old, those totems, the trees from the totems. And it's really kind of a powerful thing. And of course, that was all outlawed, the potlatch ceremonies and so on by the Canadian government. And and people had to kind of relearn the craft. It was outlawed for a while. So, was
this also a practice here in the Southeast, as much as up there?
I don't think so. Not in the same way. Certainly there was carving. The Cherokee Reservation isn't too far from here. It's 3.5 hours drive. And they have a mask making culture and figure and animal carving and so on. That goes back a ways.
Yeah.
But not that totemic, kind of, as far as we know. Yeah.
That's really cool, man. And really cool that you found yourself participating in preserving all that and stuff.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I'm preserving it, but I'm certainly influenced by it and continuing a tradition that I feel is meaningful. And I also like the idea. I mean, this kind of came after the fact, but I'm not using resins. I'm not well, a little bit for epoxying things together, but I mean, it's not harmful materials that are just ending up in a landfill. Yeah, wood is magical stuff. I like the magic of it. Taking something that looks rough on the outside, and any woodworker knows the secret. As soon as you cut into something and you look at the grain, the color, and the smell of it, and how it feels, it's really, I really connect to it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big part of it.
A while back, because of the COVID thing, I found myself in the job market, and what I found myself doing was working on log cabins for a while. And I noticed pretty immediately, that there was this sense of, I don't know if you'd call it pride, or if you'd call it connectivity, or if you'd just call it, I don't know, something that felt naturally harmonious when I would be working with those things and kind of forcing them to cooperate with me and stuff.
Yeah.
To build this structure. And that felt really ancient to me, and it was something I noticed like really immediately. It did something to my life and to my sense of creativity.
Yeah.
I wrote a lot of songs around that time that had a lot of natural imagery in it. And since then, getting out of that, haven't been as prolific about writing or whatever. Like it had a noticeable impact on my drive to be creative. And I wonder what that is all about, sometimes. But it's fascinating to me, like this strange love of wood that that people can have.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes if I'm feeling a little stuck, or have a creative block, I'll pick something up, and just the feeling of it, start working on it. Maybe just, I don't know, doing something meaningless like taking the bark away, or it can transport you. And there's something honest about wood, and thinking about the log structures. It's there. These things were cut and shaped and hoisted, and they last. You might need to take care of them, but and in today's world, to find meaning like that is not very obvious. I like that chair, by the way.
Yeah.
Speaking of wood.
Yeah, no kidding. That is a heavy son of a bitch right there.
That is neat.
Yeah. I loved about the cabins too, like these things would be 200 years old sometimes or whatever, and we'd be getting them from somewhere, and sometimes there'd be really strange markings that people had used in the building process or whatever, or weird evidences of like just strange designs. Like I loved when we would have to try to reassemble them based on pictures, and they'd be overgrown with trees and stuff, and we'd have to kind of like figure out, well, why is a window there, and why is there this tiny little door? Like this is too small to be on this side of the house, and all this stuff.
Oh yeah.
So there was all that to it as well, but then there'd be like stuff hidden, like coins hidden in the logs and the splits and stuff. All sorts of crazy shit from there. I've got some stuff over here I can show you.
Yeah,
afterward.
I want to see it.
Another one I took down in somewhere out there somewhere down 421 somewhere. I can't remember what town I was in, but I was in Davie County, I think. And one I took down was a pine cabin that was covered in cedar boards or oak boards on one side, but it was full of, the rats had stolen like negatives and photographs and stuff and put it all in the walls to build nests. So it was just full of old pictures from like the
man.
1910s and stuff.
Wow.
So I got to like snag a bunch of those and clean them and stuff. And that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, we have 2 cabins on our property that one was a log house, the other was a smokehouse where they cured the meats before refrigeration. And they were pretty decrepit, but I could tell that they were built out of oak wood mostly, mixed woods, some poplar, some pine. But we hired an expert in log restoration, and he and his tiny crew, like 2 people, worked for about a year and a half on restoring these things. And I had a bunch of old salvage material, and he furnished some things, windows with bubbly glass, and you'll have to see him sometime because they don't, it's kind of like a good haircut. You can't tell that you had it. You know what I mean? Like they really look great. And yeah, they cost a lot of money to restore them, but I'm so grateful to do it. And he told me stories about finding, he found a little, like a little miniature coffin with a carved figure in it once inside a log or inside the chinking of the log.
Wow.
And other things he's told me about. Yeah.
That's weird.
So yeah, it's I think too it gives you an insight into studying these structures and really connecting to the past, like how people lived. You know what I mean? Like how people lived right here 200 years ago.
Yeah.
And how they joined things together with pegs and hand drills.
Absolutely. Oh man, we need to walk around after this because I have plenty of things to show you. But yes, I mean really the whole pioneer thing, and it's so, I don't know, alarming, absurd. I don't know what it is, but how far removed we are from that now, and like especially like my age people, man. Like I don't know. There's so much about how to live.
Right.
That I talk to people like my landlord or my neighbor or my dad or whoever, and they just like intuitively know, oh, well, if this fucks up, this is what you have to do or whatever. But like for a lot of people my age and younger, it's just that level of being responsible for the immediate like devices and the things that you use in your life, including structures like a house, like keeping it in good shape. A lot of that stuff is just kind of we're disconnected from it, you know.
I know that bothers me. And what also bothers me, well, among other things, is that I think in the modern age, people have sort of made this need for comfort to such a degree that folks don't even need to go outside anymore, and so they don't. And I mean, I throw up my hands because if we're going to feel anything about this planet, how can you do that? So many people, in my opinion, don't really understand ecology because they've never planted a tree. And maybe they mow the grass, or maybe it's hired out. It's like, little details in life that make it rich for me. But yeah, the wood is really central to it. I mean, my house is wood. It's made of old wood, and I look at the boards of the house and I see that instead of taking them through a table saw to make them nice and perfectly flat, you can actually see the chisel marks on these boards from 175 years ago. And that makes me feel it really is comforting to me.
I dig that.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, maybe I live in a fantasy world, but it's better than some other worlds I could be living in.
Yeah. So let me ask you, we've been talking about sort of the spiritual almost meaning and component of nature and of wood. Like, is this explicit for you? Like, is this are you a religious person, I think is the question.
I think I am.
Yeah.
But I don't go to a house of worship. I mean, rarely.
Yeah.
And that's like for a wedding or a communal event kind of thing. But I think I am, without trumpeting it, and if you didn't ask, I may or may not even use the word spiritual because it's a tricky term. But then again, to be honest about what I believe in, I connect to things. I connect to animals, and I connect to all kinds of people, internationally, and that's a gift I think my parents taught me. So, am I religious? I grew up Jewish, so I think that gave me sort of a bit of an insight into a way of thinking, or ways of thinking that weren't necessarily quote unquote mainstream. I don't know if I've answered your question, but I think I have.
I think so. Yeah, and it sounds like what I'm gathering is like maybe you don't, because some people, if you ask them if they're religious or spiritual, they'd say, "Oh yeah, I'm Pentecostal" or something like that.
Right.
But you use the word connectivity a lot without using any like denomination or whatever. It sounds like for you that the idea of spirituality, maybe it just for you the experience it seemed like I was starting to hear about was being connected to Earth and connected to other beings, including animals and stuff. Is that how you kind of express your spirituality?
Yeah, and also, I admire and respect all kinds of religions because I think that's a personal choice and it's also a cultural choice that people make or have adopted. And I don't believe in dividing people, like my way is superior to your way.
Right.
That's really a problem for me.
I hear that completely.
Yeah. So
I like that, man. And like what we've been talking about, I'm very fascinated with patterns that I suspect that I'm noticing among people my age or whatever and younger. And I think that I've been kind of anticipating because I don't know. I've been watching art. Like I try to figure out what things are unfolding or whatever. And like there's been so much atheism and cynicism and stuff in the arts for a while. And I think that I've been kind of anticipating a shift towards something traditional and spiritual in a way. And I think that I'm getting the idea that that's happening. I'm getting the idea that people are starting to like shift toward something like ancient wisdom and like that it's worth being connected to. Maybe it isn't in the form of on Sunday morning you go like pay tithes to this club, but maybe it's something else. And a lot of the conversations I've been having on this podcast, it seems like other people are connected to that same wave that's kind of brewing right now.
I would like to think that you're right, because this is something that we've always had as a human race, but we're really challenged at this moment. It's obvious. Back in the 70s, when Earth Day was established. And people were talking about doing solar power, and those programs never really got well off the ground. They did not become mainstream. Yeah. Jimmy Carter was sort of, criticized for putting a sweater on, getting on television, and doing his State of the Union address in front of a fireplace, saying, "Turn the thermostat down. Don't be using too much energy." And of course, that, we're living with what happened, what has happened, which is a lot of waste and just not caring about, the next generation or the next generations. So yeah, I think, I hate to use the word crisis because it's alarming, but some of us kind of live an alternative way or think an alternative way to just the way things have been and are going. Mm-hmm. With mass consumerism, which really leads, it's putting money in people's pockets, certain folks, but it's also this planet, come on, just look at the droughts and the fires and the air quality and the lack of water. I mean, these basics, that's really going to get people's attention.
So when you talk about consumerism and stuff, you're talking about the exploitation of natural resources.
Yes.
Is that what you're
Yes,
concerned about?
and waste.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hear that. Yeah.
So, and every generation has a responsibility, for doing something good. You know what I mean? Like not just taking. I think that's my inner belief.
Yeah.
Yes, we all consume, no question. What do we give back? What can we give back?
I think, yeah, 100%. I mean, when I put this garden in, it wasn't like a big accomplishment. It's a teeny tiny garden. I'm not living off of it, obviously, but I noticed what I really enjoy doing in the mornings is going and watching the bees pollinate the flowers. I'm not really giving the bees something that they can't find another way, but I don't know. There's something I find really satisfying in
that.
small little act of like, okay, I've at least contributed something to the environment where the bees are like enjoying themselves.
Oh yeah. And that's connecting, like I have to share my garden with the critters that come up out of the woods and get up under my fence, like groundhogs and
yeah,
and deer, and and I curse them when they eat my stuff, but then I catch myself and think, there's enough to go around, and I sure love seeing them,
yeah.
Wildlife.
Same here. And like the little caterpillars too. Like sometimes if they mess up a tomato plant, I get tempted to get pretty mad. But same idea. It's like it's not all about. It seems that's such a source of peace for me. Like messing around with those plants, and so if I let it become something like anger at a caterpillar, that just seems embarrassing. That seems a little ridiculous sometimes.
I know. I've been there. And also, poisons. When I first started gardening, on my own, I just did what everyone did, what they tell you to put, 7 dust on your beans, and that'll keep well, at a certain point, I just didn't want to put that stuff in the ground anymore, and I found that, I don't even need fertilizer. I use compost.
Yeah.
And so the soil gets better and better every year in my little tiny space, but yeah, you can do what you can,
Yeah. So the first time I met you, you and my landlord were getting some wood from this old boxwood. I wonder if you could tell that story.
Sure.
And help me. I don't know. You can just talk about why you guys came out here and did that.
Well, your landlord, David, and I worked together for a good while at Guilford College. He was head of the grounds maintenance, and I was teaching in the art department. And he knew that I loved carving wood because there's some ancient boxwoods. Probably I've seen them in a photograph from 1880 something in front of Founders Hall. And as the boxwoods, sections of them would die out, I would ask him for permission to cut off the dead wood, and I would carve it. And I think I proved to him that I was careful and knew how to arbor these things. And we talk about a lot of things. The first day I met him, I remember he impressed me because he was telling me he was planning to plant native trees on campus, red oaks, white oaks, things like that. So he told me he had this 200-year-old boxwood, and would I like it? That he was going to remove it. And I said, "Are you kidding?" Of course. So we came out here and, encountered this enormous bush, and it took us, I don't know, a couple of hours to cut it back so we could manage cutting it out. And I have 2 giant sections from it in my front yard. I haven't done anything with it yet, but boxwood is particularly favored to carve. The Japanese carved boxwood to make these little toggles for their robes. These little Netsuke sculptures, little miniature sculptures, no bigger than an inch or two. The early European, medieval artists would carve religious scenes out of boxwood. It is so fine-grained, so very slow growing, very hard. It's like ivory, actually. And it's like, magic. So if I can get a hold of an English boxwood, which is what this bush was, or even American boxwood, I'm all over it. So yeah, it was quite a gift.
Yeah, the impression I got was that this was a pretty rare find. Like this was a special thing.
Yes. I mean, I think it takes about, typically 50 years for a boxwood trunk to grow like, 2.5 inches across. 2 inches across. It's very slow, and it's not big. They also used it in printmaking. In, I believe it was the Middle East, they would, Turkey, for instance. I guess it grew in Turkey plentifully, and they would take the end grain and make, from these little blocks, they would join the blocks together, glue them together, and engrave with very fine tools, really fine lines in the end grain of the wood. So super hard, great for detail. It's when I work in boxwood, I really feel like it's taking me somewhere. It's not just a generic material. I guess I'm really romantic about stuff too. Sometimes I wonder if I'm, way overdoing it. Kind of an incurable romantic, but
I mean, that sounds to me like the nature of an artist, kind of in a way. But what you just said was really interesting to me, like that when you're when working with boxwood, that's like a really almost like a transportive or something experience. Like I don't know, maybe I have things like that to compare my experience as a creative to or whatever, but I don't know. I just think it's really interesting to hear. Like what kind of place is it? Is it like a meditative place?
Yes, very much so. And it's a connective. We've been using that word. Probably used it more in the last half hour than I have in months. But it connects me to these traditions and these cultures. And it's not a really conscious. I kind of lose consciousness when I really focus. But well, you might have a similar response when you're plucking a guitar string or a banjo. I don't see any banjos, but these old instruments. Yeah, there you go. These old instruments that people who weren't necessarily, educated would pick up, and they'd hear a sound or the vibration of the string and the connection to the human voice or what have you. It doesn't need electricity, necessarily.
You are right. Those are the times. The other night I had a show, and I notice in my shows when I'm aware and when I'm not. And when I'm not aware is when I'm in the zone. And that's usually when I close my eyes and tilt my head, and I'm just like, okay, now I'm doing nothing but this, and like I have no concept of people being in the room with me or whatever. And I guess that's that same deep experience.
It's great that you can do that with an audience, that you can lose yourself and also, I guess put your guard down where you're not so self-conscious of, I'm being looked at. How are they going to perceive me? I better look cool. That's pretty admirable that you can do that.
That's exactly what I hope is. Yeah, that's the depths that I hope to reach in my shows. And it takes an audience to be there with me, I think, usually, because I can also lose it. And if I lose an audience, then there's a different depth that I have to go to. That's like an isolated depth, but when there's like an isolated performance depth and there's a connected performance depth, and the connected one is just it's a whole different thing. It's a whole different experience that I have not figured out a different way to find it in life other than in that place.
Yeah, we'll keep that precious. Yeah, I have played music pretty much all my life. At one point in time, I was, I guess, being groomed to be a classical musician, playing viola and violin, and I loved to play, but I hated to practice. And whereas art, I could practice all day long, all night, and make it, but. I'm always comparing the difference between being a musician and a visual artist, because the musician, typically one difference is that you're sharing and you have this immediate, connection and response from your audience at the moment, which is magical. It's fantastic. It's energizing. It's meaningful. The artist doesn't have that in the same way, the visual artist. It's a solitary, for the most part, unless you're collaborating and you're making with other artists, which is a great thing to do if you can do that. But you exhibit it, and you can get feedback at that moment in person. And for me, a similar charge happens if I get response when I post something on Instagram. And I get more than, a heart is great, but when somebody makes a comment that seems really heartfelt, I feel like I've reached somebody, you know what I mean? And it's thrilling, especially if that person is, in Uzbekistan or China or, somewhere far away. I've never met them, and I probably never will.
Yeah.
So yeah, the audience... You said the audience is a participant, really.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, we do this for ourselves, but God, wouldn't it be awful if we were our only audience? Ugh.
No, there's something really interesting about that. Like sharing.
Yes.
It's so complicated, whatever art is, and our whole, the thing that we do. But yeah, it's like, it's like being convicted enough to do something for yourself, and yet make that conviction like visible to other people, and that's what people judge and reward, or judge and reject, or who knows what. But that's that risk of making the thing there, doing it for yourself, and then letting people kind of observe and judge it. And it's just a really interesting pastime that I wouldn't want to do without.
Yeah, being creative is it gives life meaning, and you can be creative in so many walks of life. I mean, it's not, I don't think what we do is necessarily superior to somebody who's an accountant.
Right.
They could be creative too and help people and share and all that. But there's definitely a need for what we do. It's a primitive thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we shouldn't, downplay it. And it has a hard time surviving. I mean, a lot of us have to live without a lot of things because it's not typically rewarding monetarily.
Right.
I mean, if you're not commercial, if you're not sort of, making something for mass consumption, then your audience is going to be a lot smaller. But the trade-off is you feel good inside. You feel like you're doing something that you need to be doing.
That's what I love so much about your art, and also getting now to talk to you about music too, is the primitive. Your stuff is a little more explicitly primitive, whereas like some approaches to music can try to abandon tradition altogether. I'm sure like some more abstract or more modern approaches to visual art or
Right.
every medium can
Yeah.
neglect or betray
Yeah.
or whatever. Try to go somewhere where the traditions don't take them. But what I love so much about your wood medium, and also talking about drums with you and talking about music, is just like this root that goes deep, deep, deep into our species that like cannot be denied. And I'm just wondering, like, what we do with that.
Mm-hmm.
Like this idea of a wave or whatever, whether it's true or not. Like, I think the question I'm trying to ask is, how would you put into words like how you understand the value of maybe people in younger generations being connected to this root that goes deep into our species?
Wow, that's a powerful thing to ponder. I mean, I sort of eschewed even getting a cell phone for years. I was, a very late arrival, and yet I was teaching, 18, 17-year-olds to typically 22-year-olds, college students, and older people who are coming back to school, which I always loved having them in the classroom. But I felt like by the time I retired from teaching after 41 years, sometimes I would say to myself, I can't compete with the cell phone, because I'd look up, I'd be delivering a lecture or a talk or something, and somebody would be furtively, playing with their phone under the desk. I said, wait till the break, go out and do whatever you want. But I understand how addictive it is, and I spend a fair amount of time, looking at things on the phone. I'm not on Facebook because I think that would be too much for me. But I love to connect to people that I know and share ideas and so on. But I guess what I'm saying is to have a balance from, social media, media in general, that is like reality packaged for consumption, and it's typically pretty sensationalized, versus, experiencing something yourself in a moment in time, is a big different thing. I mean, one can get really depressed and overwhelmed by messages that are delivered to us, over the waves. And you can just feel like, throwing up your hands and throwing in the towel. But
Yeah.
like you said, go outside and look at the honeybees, They don't care about politics. I mean, they will if deregulation, gets out of hand. But as far as the root goes, this is just me. I love folk art. I love folk art. Many folk traditions, but I like you used the word primitive, I think, didn't you, a minute ago? There's something honest about it, and direct, and sometimes a little clumsy. Sort of like listening to Lightning Hopkins play the blues, on his guitar. I mean, maybe that guitar might be a little bit out of tune, but it almost makes it better, like it richer, and you can hear his foot stomping on the floorboard maybe. But I don't know. I just like that honesty, and I like that stripped down, basic thing that's coming out. But again, that's totally a personal choice that I have. I'm not putting down bigger production kinds of things, but that's what I gravitate toward.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
I like the humanity of it, and like the imperfections, and the I don't know, like someone told me once, they said, I like the experience of like the recordings to be as close to the condition I think the way it was said, this is just rephrasing it or whatever, but I want it to be as close to the condition of when the song was written or like rehearsed on the couch or something. I want it to be as close as it can be to that, with more so than like this polished, perfected
Right.
thing. And that makes sense to me. I mean, it seems like it's the creative accomplishment of the thing that's really the interesting thing. It's not like, of course, there's a beautiful science about recording and a beautiful science to how we capture things like in other mediums, but really the creative value that most people are getting from a song is more so, for a lot of people, I think it's more so either in the mood of the song or the words that are written or the melody that exists, more so than necessarily the perfection of the recording.
Yeah, that's a crucial thing. I mean, I really love, let's just say, soul music from the 1960s, because, and for instance, Stax Records out of Memphis, Tennessee, that had their recording studio was an old movie theater, that had a certain sound, like, the floor sloped down, and they would record in, I guess, this echo chamber, and it was live. They weren't dividing up, at least not initially.
Right.
I mean, they were, if you've ever seen any of those specials on Stax, when Otis Redding would be recording a song, he'd be pushing the trumpet player in the chest, to get him to emote more. I mean, these, and also I've been to Hitsville, USA, and Detroit, Motown recording studio, and it's a great, if you're ever around Detroit, it's well worth a visit, because Berry Gordy bought these little houses in a neighborhood, and I mean, the basement, you go down this basement, I don't know if it was a dirt floor at the time, but it's still pretty, I mean, it was paved at some point, but you go down this little handrail that literally you can't fit two people side by side, and it's grubby, and I'm putting my hand where, Marvin Gaye had his hand, or whoever, and it's magic. It was done, much of it was done live initially.
Yeah.
And musicians, you could feel it, their connection. It's different, I think. I've heard this from musicians who record. When you divide up and record it many different ways. You're right. It's probably a better recording, with more perfect, I guess you could say. So maybe to get back to without overstating it, young people, like coming up.
Yeah.
There are lots of pressures and lots of, so many things about life these days in 2022 that I think we all need to figure out how to feel grounded. We all suffer. We all have our moments of feeling insecure and uncomfortable, and, whatever that means. But there are ways, there are strategies, and we have to share them and learn about them. And you're never too old to learn new things, and you're never too young to listen and respect, and people who have experience. We all. I mean, I was a rebel, right, as a young person.
Yeah.
But I did listen to some people. I must have. Because I could have gone down some pretty bad paths when I was a teenager, and I'm grateful that I avoided certain things.
Yeah.
Actually, because I'm still here at almost 70 years old.
Man, when we, I thinking about how I phrased that question too, like, I don't know if young, like, of course young kids are going to be rebellious and they're going to be all that. Like, they're naturally, it seems, given to want to criticize and change society and do things that, like, ruffle feathers and stuff, and more power to all of that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't think they even take much coaxing when it comes to, like, when they are around musical instruments, or when they're around probably somebody who is exposing them to wood carving or something. I don't think it's like, they probably don't even have to. I've never been in a I have been in teaching things and seen a little bit of this in terms of music, but not as formally, I don't suppose, as the environments that you have. But yeah, I would imagine it doesn't take a ton of conscious convincing to appeal to somebody's imagination with an ancient craft like
Right.
that.
Yeah, a lot can get in the way, like we were talking a little bit earlier about being judged, and the whole thing about talent and skill and training and education, you know, c- concepts about those terms, I think can get in the way, because quality is quality and honesty is honesty, and I mean, it's you're right. Picasso said it took him his whole life to learn how to draw like a child, and he lived to be 92 years old. And I think what he meant by that is honest, direct, unfettered, just true to whatever you're feeling. And yes, it's a natural thing, absolutely. Unfortunately, because of so much of the education system, these things are not really valued. And sometimes these programs, as you probably well know, are being cut or looked at as frills or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's a mistake.
Man, when you said that, the person that came to mind for me, the Picasso quote, the person that came to mind was Tom Waits, who is probably my number one, like, music, just somebody I look at and I just think, what a miracle that you happened. And he in some of his songs and some of his approach to art does have has had this sometimes like childlike freedom that's just so void of insecurity and void of anything weak. And he has that song, I Don't Want to Grow Up, and he he's a mature man, and there's like such a maturity in his music and in his creativity, and he's singing this song. Have you ever seen the video for I Don't Want to Grow Up?
I don't know. I've seen videos of his performances, but
This
I don't know if
one
I've seen that one.
is like a music video, and it starts out for some reason he's riding around a tricycle dressed as the devil, and I think he has high heels on.
Wow.
And then then you like zoom into this space, so you're looking at this room, and it's a performance space. But then like from the background and the curtain comes in Tom Waits, and it turns out he's in this room that's probably about 3 feet tall, and he fills it up with his giant body. The microphone is like this big, and he has a little toy guitar in his hands, and that's how he performs the song. I don't want to grow up. I don't want to become insecure, and I don't want to have to think about all this bullshit. I don't want to grow up. And there's something so simple and so childish and so free about it, but there's something really fucking sophisticated about it. There's something really deeply beautiful about it.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't know, you just brought that to mind, I guess, talking about the childlike sort of thing that's in that we strive for eventually if we're mature enough to be childlike,
Yeah. Good point.
There's a weird paradox in there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of innocence. You retain something of innocence, even though you've seen a lot of stuff that isn't so innocent and even demonic. The older you get, you really. But then again, if you surround yourself with, or at least have in your life, people who are positive, that's pretty important. It's way too easy to be cynical. It's just too easy to destroy.
Yeah.
It's so much harder, but got to do it, is to build. And it's just so tragic, the destruction that we see. I'm thinking of the shootings in schools, and I mean, I'm so fucking grateful I had a real childhood It was, I mean, it was relatively blissful, but yeah, there was pain, there was suffering, there was insecurity, there was all that self-consciousness. But my God, when I went to school, I didn't think about going through a metal detector or any of that.
Yeah.
God, it's just tragic. Come on. You know? This is broken. And so come on. This is not a normal that we should accept. Anyway, that's enough of that.
No, you're fine, man. I mean,
Enough of that.
you said something. You made a distinction between like creating and destroying, and like that can take so. There's so many. I have a lot to say about this that I will not. But the point is simply that I just really agree and appreciate where you're coming. I agree with and appreciate where you're coming from, because I do sense a lot of cynicism and a lot of just let's burn, like so much frustration that it's just like let's burn everything the fuck down,
Right.
because this is getting ridiculous, and I understand it and I fear it and
Yeah.
I relate to it,
Yeah.
which is why I fear it,
Yeah.
because I know how that feels, and I wish I knew how to compel people more toward this feeling like we have to build. We can't, as tempting as it is to want to just say fuck everything, like we have to try to harness and build everything.
Better way to live. It's a lot more fun. And you're a lot happier person doing that.
Yeah.
Because who wants to be miserable all the time? It's no fun. And sometimes I have to catch myself, if I get too involved with consuming the news through my phone,
Yep.
for too long, reading the same kind of garbage just presented. And some of it's not garbage. Some of it is kind of entertaining, and some of it is informative. But society seems to be functioning pretty
Exactly.
well for the most part.
Yeah.
So, it's a challenge being a human being, isn't it?
It can be.
But life is rich. It really is. It's fantastic. It's so great, especially when we get outside of our little boxes of misery, so to speak, and get out in nature.
Completely agree.
I had a conversation with a cab driver. We were just on the West Coast, flying into Seattle from California, and this is a young African-American man, probably he's 29, and his roots, his grandmother, his family was from, West Africa. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Ethiopia. And he told me that, and I just said, yeah, I hear things are pretty rocky there politically, and he talked about that. And the more that we talked, once we made that connection, I could sense a sadness coming over him. And when he brought us to our destination, he stopped and he just said, what advice would you give, a young person like myself? This guy's like really working hard to save money so he could travel, he could go to Ethiopia. He had never been there. And, just basically a working man making his way. And, I kind of was a little bit, put on the spot. Like, what advice do I give this person just having this connection for a half an hour? That means something. It isn't just BS or me acting like the old sage. I said, you've got your youth. I said, you're 29, I'm 69. You have a lot going for you. And he was handsome and he looked healthy and everything. And I said, well, surround yourself with people that bring you up. And, he talked about not having too many friends, like limiting a lot of it with COVID and things closing down and him being hardworking, I think he worked a couple of jobs, but I appreciated that he was asking me that, Anyway.
Yeah.
It relates to what you were saying earlier about generations helping each other,
I think a lot of, I think a lot of folks, young folks in particular, well, it's also connected to something I was talking about earlier. Just I mean, in my life, I wasn't in the same situation. Like my grandfather, for example. My grandfather was like a great builder, and it's because when he was coming up, they had to build the shit they needed. And he was a great gardener, and it was because growing up, they had to grow the shit they needed, you know.
Didn't have the cash flow to buy whatever they wanted whenever they wanted it.
Right. And didn't even have, like, they were just poor and shit. And that, you know, like, it was just a different life he lived. And, you know, that bled into my parents' life and my uncle's life and stuff. So they were exposed to more of what it meant to be independent and to grow things or whatever. And I was exposed to it a little bit, but a fraction of what the wisdom that my grandfather had, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that same principle applies to a lot of things. The further we get into, the deeper we get into modernity and this world that we live in now, it's like we just have been for a long time losing a connection to wisdom that predates us. And I think a lot of us feel fucking lost. We don't know what life we're supposed to be striving for. We don't know what identity is and where to get it, which ones are the right ones to choose. Like, identity's all fucked up for a lot of people, especially, you know, I was brought up with a religious identity, and when I decided to discard the one that I had, it really put me in this whirlwind of like, oh shit, like I don't know what fills that space now, and there's a lot of options for it. So, you know, I think a lot of people are lost, and we look to other people sometimes to get some ideas about how to sort all this out.
You know, there are a lot of wisdoms that occur when you're very young, and they occur all through your life. You know, I love learning new things, and you know, we've got this visitor who from, you know, our great niece who's 20 years old, and we stayed up to well after midnight last night. She's, I mean, teaching me, you know what I mean? I'm teaching her, and it's just like so cool that and wonderful that we can humble ourselves. That's another thing, you know, that word I haven't used, but humility. You know, roots, humility, honesty. Isn't that a word that isn't used enough? I mean, I didn't grow up with social media. That's another part of the conversation with the cab driver. Is I could tell he was, you know, oh, social media. I have to put that down sometimes. And another piece of advice I gave him, you know, my 2 cents basically is get out in nature. And he thanked me for saying that, because be somewhere that's greater than you. You know what I mean? Like, if you can get into the woods, the deep woods, an old forest, or the ocean, you know, like look at something that's vast and much greater than you, and admire that greatness, you know. I mean, to pick up your point, I'm thinking about my parents who were both in the World War II effort overseas and lived through the Great Depression, and you know, people died a lot younger back then. You know, my grandfather died at 40, I don't know, 47, 40 something.
Man.
Yeah, you know, from some flu, and she was on her own at 17, you know. Man. A woman back in the friggin' 1930s, late 30s, and somehow made it. She came from a big family, and she was independent, and so, yeah, I mean, feminism has been around for a long time, you know, and heroic people fighting for human rights have been doing it forever. And that's what I love about history, is how much you can learn about the greatness that people have strived for, and the sadness too, you know, but I don't know. I guess they felt like it was worth it. Yeah. Right? Making those efforts. I admire that.
Yeah, history, man, is a son of a bitch. On the other side of my family, is the Cuban side. I don't know if I can't remember if we talked about that or not.
No.
We had joked a bit about my name when David was here. But anyway, on my mom's side of Cuban heritage, and yeah, like I guess with podcasting, you just kind of share whatever comes to mind.
Sure. Why not?
I just watched a movie called Plantados. I don't know if you ever heard about them, but like it was like a culture of Cuban guys who got arrested under Castro for kind of like resisting the revolution. And basically they went through hellish torture like that of the Soviet Union or of other ideological torture chambers that just absolutely forsook people's humanity or whatever. And these guys would just basically look in the guards' faces and say, we are the planted ones. We're the ones that can't move or whatever. And the guards would kill them and torture them and do all sorts of horrible shit to them, you know. And I guess as we were just talking about human resilience and the people who survived things, obviously that's a flash forward from the 1930s or whatever. But yeah, man, human resilience and the lessons that history teaches us about human resilience and the fortitude people have, it's fucking horrifying, but also, you know, worth having a relationship with, for sure.
Yeah, it makes you a deeper human. Actually, if you had a cigar in your mouth, you got that Castro beard going on.
I really do. And I've got the camo hat today, too. Oh, Jesus. Yeah.
So let me ask you this. I mean, I know you're interviewing me, but since you brought it up, do you, from your mother's heritage and history, have you heard stories? Have you heard narratives and details about, you know, what life in Cuba was like back then?
Yeah.
Have you absorbed?
Yeah, it's kind of a ritual for me, because this is like, I maybe like this Ethiopian guy you're talking about. I don't know, but for me, I don't want to say this wrong. I don't resent or have bad feelings about the American identity. I think it's interesting, and I think that particularly like the rebelling from England, I think is fun. But there's a depth that the Cuban part of me offers that I am a lot more curious about. I think because there's so much mystery and so much like old stuff there. Like there's all this African religion that is really dominant and predominant in Cuba and stuff. Mm-hmm. Stuff that I would really love to know more about.
Right.
So I have a habit of kind of spending time with my grandmother and just asking about everything. And it's just a bizarre story. The whole thing is just a bizarre story. You know, my great-grandfather, I think, was born in 1897 in Havana. Mm-hmm. And I get to, you know, they obviously, their story starts when my great-grandparents were, you know, like in their 20s, I guess. My grandmother and her sister, I mean. So there's a lot about my great-grandparents' life before them that I wish I could learn about. Like, what did Havana look like? When did you guys start getting electricity and shit? And when, like, what were the roads like? What was the food that you ate and stuff like that? I want to know all that.
Yep.
But yes, I've like memorized pretty much my grandmother's biography from you know, when she left and when Castro took over, and my great aunt, my grandmother's sister, and how she got sent off to the, you know, they were all under a dictatorship that was basically just a asshole dictator, under which plenty of them harbored resentment for the most wealthy and most sort of beneficiaries of the society, but I don't know, like it was a minority of people that really wanted to take that next step with overthrowing things and silently, I guess, having attachments to like the Soviet Union and to communism and stuff. So
yeah.
Then my great aunt apparently like attended meetings that Castro held where he spoke. So she was
Wow.
like witness to all
Oh,
that.
wow.
So
That's important history.
yeah, yeah. So they both were out of the country by the time Castro took over. My great grandparents were there for I think 7 years. They were there and couldn't leave. And so I've got to hear a lot about what life was like during that time and what happened to them, what was seized, how they had to live, like what the lifestyle was. 7 years later, they made it here and became citizens. I believe this was when I was a kid. One day there was like news crews, and Richard Burr was at my grandma's neighbor's house. That's where my great grandparents lived, at my great aunt's house, and he was there to make them honorary citizens of the U.S. and of North Carolina. And I think they might have been the oldest people, or some of the oldest people to ever become citizens in the state of North Carolina. They were in their 90s by that time.
Incredible.
So, so anyway, that was all pretty cool. He lived to be 102. He died in 99. So he almost lived entirely through the 20th century.
Unreal.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a lot there.
Yeah.
The last punctuation is this that I'll mention because I think it's so badass. My grandmother, with this whole experience and everything, and her having come here and her enthusiasm for America, the place that saved her as far as she's concerned, she spent pretty much the next 30 years legalizing, like finding people in the Hispanic community who weren't legal citizens and helping them find a path toward citizenship. And she and her sister helped over like 700 people get citizenship here,
That's
which
amazing.
I think is fucking cool.
Wow. Yeah, it's soul.
Yeah.
It's called soul
Yeah.
and hardship. That's what soul comes out of, right?
Mm-hmm.
Deep soul. And there's a lot there. I don't know if you ever watch Finding Your Roots, Henry Louis Gates's program
No.
on PBS.
No, I don't
it's
know this one.
Fantastic. Well, he's a great historian, African-American historian. And he has a popular television show where he interviews guests, celebrities, people from all stripes, but some of them are well known, news anchors or actors or whoever. It could be Meryl Streep. It could be, just lots of different folks from different walks of life, and basically does these histories. He's got this whole crew, they have the means. And I'm recalling a Cuban, I think he's a news anchor out of New York City, and I can't remember his name, but he has Cuban heritage, and they go way back in the records, and then they go to DNA, and it's just incredible. I mean, it could be Bernie Sanders one week, it could be Terry Crews, the actor Terry Crews another time, or Questlove, the Roots drummer. I mean, they identified the name of the ship that his ancestors came over from Africa, and how
Really?
rare that was. Oh,
Holy
my God.
shit.
Yeah, it's a lot of holy shit moments. And tears, lots of tears shed, and lots of deeply difficult moments, confronting slavery, slave owners, the whole nine. And it's a great program if you get a chance. It's typically on Tuesday night, but the Cuban connections were always powerful, these pictures, these photographs. He really makes history come alive, and the roots and the lives and the surprises.
Yeah, that sounds really down my alley, and I will make it a point to find that. Yeah.
It's incredible.
There is something oddly tragic about the Cuban story, man. It's uniquely tragic in a way, and I don't know why. It's certainly not worse than the Soviet Union story. The Soviet Union story is quite a nightmare of its own.
Yeah.
But there's something Cuba is so romantic and vibrant and rich and beautiful, and the people have this Latin happiness that can't be, they can't, it's really hard to lose. But yet there's these horrible, horrible shadows of, I mean, my grandparents, they knew, it was just everyday common knowledge that you could get snatched up, taken to a wall where they took people to kill them, and you would face this wall and you'd get shot to death. And this happened to my grandparents' friends, and they made it a point to tell me about an artist once that was a visual artist that was he had a business doing like decals and stuff for people. They just randomly picked him out one day and said, "You're arrested and we're going to kill you." And he was like, "Why?" And continuously trying to explain that there was no grounds for this or something, that whatever he was being accused of was incorrect. But they persisted until like at a last minute sort of like Hail Mary, he got pulled out of this situation. He wasn't killed, but they said after having experienced that trauma, that he just totally went mad. Like he just wasn't the same person anymore after that.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are lots of sad stories about despots convincing folks to do bad things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's if we can absorb it and not hide from it. That's the thing that also comes out in this program, that certain generations did not talk about the painful past. Number one, it was way too damn painful to relive this horrible, these wounds, whatever that culture was, right? Could be Eastern Europeans, could be Cubans, could be African Americans, could be, people that have suffered, could be Irish, could be, you know what I'm saying? Like, and so there were lost histories. There were generations of loss, where you couldn't talk to an older person and say, "What happened?" You don't want to know about it. And that's changed some, I guess, maybe.
It seems like that's a message that people are trying to change now, really trying to say,
well,
fucking, we got to talk about shit.
There's a lot of great writing coming out right now about things, histories. And of course, there's also resistance to those histories. States like Texas, where they're not allowing this 1419 project, 1619. I might have the date wrong, but it's basically about the founding of America, and and the role that slavery had even before America was founded. A slave ship that just ended up here on the shores of wherever, and oh no, we can't teach that because it does something to that happy myth of pilgrims and Indians sitting down and all that kind of shit. I mean, come on. Yes, people were collaborating, but let's face it and grow from it, right?
100%.
Whew.
Yeah, I have one other thing I want to ask about.
Alrighty.
We can move on, but one thing we have talked a bit about, a word that has appeared throughout the conversation is magic. That was a theme in another podcast I had, and it actually started to like fuck with me pretty bad thinking about it, and so I didn't really get to talk about it too as deeply as I would like to because it was making me feel things. But magic, I wonder, as we've talked, and as you've talked about the magic of wood, the magic of art, the magic of different things, what do you think that is?
I think it's about transformation, not necessarily knowing the outcome, experimenting, delight, discovery, the unexpected, the marvelous, and it's fantastic, and it can happen. It's not that commonplace unless you really look for it and seek it out. I used to say that in my drawing classes, make some magic. Nobody ever asked me what I meant by that, but I liked saying it. Yeah, I think that's it in a nutshell. Sort of like miracles, the word miracles. I don't believe in miracles, but I was transporting I had an 11-foot long sculpture of a female diver that I had to deliver to an art gallery, and I had two friends with a pickup truck that were going to take me, and one of them came down with COVID, the other was out of town, and I was feeling helpless, and my wife and I wrestled this heavy log into my van, and literally the tips of the fingers touched the console in the front of the van, and the tips of the toes were about an inch from the hatchback as I closed it, and I thought, that's a miracle. But that's magic. Magic for me. It's delightful. Now you got me thinking about Cuban music, which I love.
Oh, yeah. I'm guessing you've seen Buena Vista.
Oh.
Yeah. Buena Vista
And the
Social
great thing
Club.
about that film is it was like, first of all, you have Ry Cooder, who's, wow, what a creative, what an insight into roots, and not just Cuban roots, all kinds of musical roots. And he gave me an insight into Cuba, because we've been deprived of Cuba, basically.
Yeah.
That's on my bucket list, by the way, to go to Havana.
Me too.
The architecture, the cars, everything, the warmth you mentioned, the Caribbean vibe. But so yeah, he gave us, and these old performers that have been sort of forgotten, quote unquote. Amazing.
There's another documentary worth watching. It's called I can't remember. It's it might be Castro and the cameraman. It might be Cuba and the cameraman or something. It's on Netflix, and it's just this guy who loved Cuba, and over the a career of 30 or 40 years, just went there and had relationships and had adventures and stuff. And there's one story in particular that is really worth seeing. It's about some farmers, and just to give it context, my Peruvian friend he'd said something to me once about how it's like a pride in Latin culture to not complain about things. Like Latin people just don't bitch about things.
Nice.
And that is something that I think I sort of noticed, and I saw that reach its breaking point in this documentary, and it's emotional when it does. And anyway, I think it's worth a watch if you're ever curious. But
Yeah.
I do. I love Cuban music. And the reason I asked about that, I just think that I had a heavy dose of cool, I'm going to be a cool atheistic nihilist for a couple years because that's cool and intellectual or something. And I did that, and it made me not appreciate the magic in the world. And I'd say now on this side of it, I might appreciate it more than I ever have. But and so maybe it was good for that reason. But I do notice when I think I notice in other people's lives, if they refuse the magic, I find it really sad. And I just, whatever. I don't know how to put it into words other than, that it's a good idea, I think, to see the magic and make the magic and allow yourself to believe the magic or something.
Yeah, I agree. Yep. It's a good way to think about it.
I hope so. I will tell you, I we can wrap it up, but just talking to you, I'm I think I'm curious about this whole carving thing. I think I want to be more exposed to that.
Good.
I don't know, man, just the richness, I think, of something even something like that. I don't know what else to say about that, but I really love the way that you've talked about it, and I think I want to follow up with you on learning more about that.
Yes, you need to do that. It's kind of cool how we randomly met, in the middle of a field off a quarter of a mile dirt road in the middle of quote unquote nowhere.
Yeah,
and seem to have all these connections.
Yeah.
So keep it going.
All right. I guess we'll shut it down for today, but thank you for coming over. And if you got time, I wouldn't mind showing you some of my cabin collectibles.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right.
I can't wait to hear this.
Good deal.